I'm running on the backend express book list. That's what we've done so far. We've been able to also not just read the book list, but update the shopping cart application. Let's take a look and see what we've got so far. So again, we're here in books, and what I can do with this, and again, I'm running on the backend express, our own personal express server, and we can add to the cart. As an example, we can add other items to the cart. You can see that we have a couple of items. And then what we can do here is I can add a quantity and I can check out. And when I do that, and if I put in some details, like for example, my name, this is not my name, but let's suppose it is, right? And One Dundas Drive, and that's in Toronto, making this up, and then it's Ontario, and L5, L1, G5, sure, and then Canada. Okay, again, there's some great opportunities here to improve the interface by just using basic HTML, drop downs, and that kind of stuff. That's not the focus of our example, though. Let's complete the order. So when you complete the order, it says thanks. So what does it do? Well, we can't tell because we can't get the order right now. We can't see it. However, what we have done in the back end is if I go to localhost and I'll look at localhost 3500, and if I go to orders, and if I just press that, you can see now I should see some orders, and you can see that the last order I did is right here. Right, you can see that it's not shipped and whatever. So I got a couple orders in the pipeline right now, but there's no way I can do any kind of modification to the order. I can't do anything. So our goal is to create a admin view in order for us to, first of all, list this order, modify the books, and a bunch of stuff. So there's going to be several videos on this side in order for us to do this. And of course, we have to do it all securely with JWT, which is the focus of this week. Okay, so how do we get there? How do we start? What do we do? So the first thing we want to do, and again, just following the PowerPoint only from by the way, this is what we're doing. We're just going to start with Express, and we're going to start by adding an authentication component on the Angular side. But we want to follow a little bit of what's happening with the PowerPoint only from a guidance perspective, right? So again, they're using a sports store, we're using a bookstore, but there's some changes. First, what the recommendation is, let's add an authentication component. And the idea is to create a new app or admin folder, an admin folder with an authentication component. And that's totally fine. I'm okay with that idea, the admin folder. Again, I'm going to use the Angular CLI because it helps when it comes to how things link together. So again, I'm going to go into the clients here. I'm going to go into SRC app. And when we're in here, I'm just going to type in ng-gc. So that's Angular generate component. That's what it stands for. And then the name of the component and the folder. So it's going to be in the admin folder. Inside the admin folder, we're going to make an auth component. Auth, like this, right? And then we press enter, and it creates the component for us. And bam, we have an admin folder, and we have inside of there an auth component, which is nice, right? Let's look at that auth component for a second, and let's take a look and see what's been done. So we have app auth, that is the selector, the custom selector. This is a review. And what we want to do is we want to add forms. So let's add in an import. And we want to add in the ng form idea. There we go. Oops. Let's put that in here. And as we're going, we also want to add the router because we're going to do some routing. So now again, where do we need it? Well, first of all, inside of our class, we want to put a public, for now, username, right? And we're going to replace this with a user object, but we're going to put username, password for now, because that's what they start off with, username, password. And what's going to happen is we also want to put an error message. So that's the book. The book tells us to do this. It also tells us to put together our private router object in the constructor. We want to pick this one, right, which actually does all of our imports nice, right? And then what we want to do, we'll ignore the on init like we've done in the past, but we'll make a new authenticate method, which takes in a form, which is of type ng form. Okay, ng form. And what we're going to do is we're going to say that if form.valid, then what we want to do is we want to say, wow, we're getting a lot of weird stuff here. If the form is valid, then what I want to do is I want to perform authentication. Now remember, we have an authentication backend on the Express side, and we want to tap into this, which is this.router.navigate by URL, and we want to go to something called the admin main page. Okay, so this is as per the PowerPoint. We're going to modify this pretty heavily actually in a second. So because this doesn't make sense with our structure, as you'll see in a second. All right, but we do this. This is good for the book as a book example. But the thing is, in our example, what we have is a full-fledged API on the back end. So this part is okay. I like this part, and we just have to fix some of our linting issues. Again, pretty fast and simple to do that. We still have this one. It says our auth component doesn't return anything, right? Because what it's expecting is a return type. We know that this is going to return void, so this is what we have to put here for now. So that is our basic component. And where did this go? This component got listed somewhere, right? So again, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because great idea, but there's going to be a problem with this. The problem that we're going to have is our auth component, which is something that we want to do, has no idea of a user model. In the back end, what we have is a user model in order for us to log in. So let's jump the gun here and go into our models and take a look at our user model, right? So again, if you look at, I'll open this up in a side-by-side view for now. Here's our user model. And this is something we built before because we were able to log in and so on. We want to maintain this. We don't want to reinvent the wheel with a username and password. So this is a nice idea that the book had and the PowerPoint has, and it works for the sports store example, but it's not going to work exactly like this for us. So what to do? Well, we need some kind of user model of our own. So let's create that for us right now. So in the model folder, models, I'm going to make a new file in preparation. It's going to be called the user.model.ts because we want to be able to take advantage of our user model that we had before, right? So that is not where I wanted it. It's the wrong place. Let's just delete that one more time. And yeah, we're going to put that where it's supposed to be in the front end, which is this model. Let's do that again. So new, we're going to say user.model.ts. There we go. So this user model.ts is going to be something where we're going to put in, we're going to use an export class that we're going to call user. Again, it's going to should mirror the stuff that we've already gotten. Remember in the front end, or the back end, I mean, let's put that over here so we can see it. And so you can see the user model. The user model used username and email and display name and so on. We need to do the same thing with a username and password. So it's username. The password is, even though it's going to be a string type, it's going to be something we can't see. We have an email, which is going to be a string, as well as a display name, which is going to be a string. Now here's the thing, we don't care about the other stuff that it has here. We don't really care about created and updated because we're not going to do anything with that. That's going to happen at the back end, where we can, if we did an audit or some kind of profile update, we can go in here and do that. Right now our app doesn't do that. We're keeping track of this just in case in the future you wanted to go and update your password or anything else like that. You'd update the update property, and that would be it. So we already have this backend. There's no need to reinvent it. We have it, we can connect to it, and we already have an admin user. So this is good for the front end. I mean, because we want to put this into the front end. Okay, that's the first thing. An admin user, a model, right? So that's number one. Second thing is, now that we have this, let's just get rid of this. And here's our user. Our auth component.ts now, the way it was formulated before, it has this username and password. We're not going to do that because that doesn't make any sense. Like I said, instead, we're going to keep the component on init and ng form and everything else. We're also going to tie into an auth service. But for now, what we want to do is we want to import our user, right? And we want to get that user model from, and again, it's slash model slash user. Oops. User model. Okay, that's important. So once we've done this, we've tapped into the user model here. We want to be able to, we don't care about the CSS. CSS isn't going to really change. Even in fact, our selector isn't that important because we're not like going to put in a selector for this. So this is nice to have, but it's unnecessary for us because we're going to use our things in a different way. So we really don't need the username and password. Instead, we're going to use a user object. So we're going to say that we need a public user object of type user. That makes more sense for us because we're going to have a user object on our end. Okay, so that's the first thing. So yeah, the authenticate is cool. This authenticate idea is good, but what I want to do is connect to two things. We're going to connect to a, instead of our form, just our form.valid, we want to connect to our auth service, which we don't have yet. So we're going to make an auth service, and that this authentication service is going to be the middleman or the middleware between us and the backend. We need to be able to connect to that. Okay, so now that's kind of a dependency. We're going to make that auth service, a service object itself. And we're going to make this all work. So again, the auth service could be in the models folder because we have data sources and we have a bunch of other stuff in here. It's not a bad place to put it. You could also make your own service folder, but I think in the model it might be best. So let's make a new file and we'll call this file auth.service.ts, and in preparation for what we need to do. Okay, so auth service.ts. Again, what we need here is to import injectable, okay, which is going to be from Angular core, okay, and we're also going to import observable because we definitely have to do that from RxJS, just like we've talked about in the past. And I'm also going to import from our REST data source. REST data source, that's important also to do. Okay, so these are all the imports we're going to require, as well as the JWT helper service. Okay, we've kind of got that before. So we're going to have this JWT helper service, and you can see that was there as well. So these are all things we did in prep from before anyway. So we have all this stuff. So these are the four imports we're going to do for our auth service. Just like we did for our model, we're also going to, for the auth service, we need to understand what the user is. We're going to get the user model, and what we're going to do is we're going to say from/user model. All right, so we need to get an understanding of that as well. Once we have all the imports done, we're going to go @injectable, right? Because we want to decorate our class, which is going to be called auth service, with an @injectable. And let's make sure it's spelled properly. I know my linter automatically changes things for me. We're going to say we're going to have a user of type user. We're going to have a constructor. Inside the constructor is going to be a private data source. We're going to call this data source, which is of type REST data source. There is that. And inside the constructor, we're going to say this .user, we're going to initialize it, is equal to a new user. We have to kind of set up a temporary user object that we're going to be passing around for the most part. Okay, so that's the one thing. Now that we have that, let's set up our couple things that we need. I want to be able to talk to the back end, and again, we're just scaffolding out. These pieces all kind of link together. The auth service is going to talk to the data source to authenticate us. Okay, so before we get there, let's scaffold the stuff we need. So I need an authenticate object or method, which is going to return an observable of type any for now. Okay, so that's what we need from there. For now, we're not going to return anything. We're going to leave this blank like this. We're going to come back to this. We also need to store user data, because remember, we're going to kind of store the user data as well. We're going to use a token which is of type any, and a user which is of type user, right, to do this, which is going to return void. These are all the requirements for us getting going with the back end. And I'll explain everything, how it interconnects in a bit. Okay, we don't have this, but we're going to scaffold this out as well. Next, we're also going to get a, you're going to use a getter, which is called authenticated. Authenticated is a Boolean. Either I'm authenticated or not, is what it's going to really say. Okay, oops. I'm authenticated or not. And what it's going to return is, we're going to go to the authenticated data source and see that we're logged in. Either we're logged in or we're not logged in. And we're also going to have to do a logout. So we're going to say do a logout. So these are all things that are part of the auth service. Log in, log out. This is going to be of type observable any. I love how this works. And then we're going to return some. So these are all the methods that we have to scaffold out. So we have to do this first. And it's gonna break our code right now. But going back to auth component, if I go back to auth component, right? Because again, we're building this all kind of, one thing depends on another thing, and we'll talk about this, okay, a little bit. There's dependencies here. So in my authenticate, I'm back in auth.component. We have our auth service, but we need to link to it. So I'm going to do that now. So up here, as an example, we have our not our auth service, our auth component, and underneath our router, what we're going to do is we're going to say that we're going to import the auth service. Let's get that going. So auth service, and it's going to be from dot slash model, right, and slash auth service. So we have a link to that right now. We're kind of connecting one thing to the other thing. Fantastic. So what we want to do then is inside of our constructor, we want to add that service in. So we're going to kind of do something like a private auth, which is going to be of type auth service. Make a reference to that service itself. We could have called it a lot of different things, but this is kind of more like a convention that we're using here. On ng on init, instead of inside the constructor, let's use that. We're going to make a new user object like we did before. It's a temporary user object that we're going to pass around in here inside of inside of our auth component class. That's what we're going to be doing. And in authenticate now, so the idea for authentication was good, but we have to go further than what we were doing in the book because of our back end. So here's what that would look like. So instead of navigate by URL going to a main, nice, this is okay, this is where main will take us. We don't even have this route yet. We're going to have to make that on the front end in order for us to get there. But what we want to do instead is we want to give some space. We want to say that if, so if the form is valid, then this .auth.authenticate, we're going to pass this in this user over. So this .user, we're passing it over, and we're going to subscribe. We're going to subscribe, and we're going to have a bit of data. And that data that we're going to get from the auth service is going to basically provide us whether we have success or not. So if we have success, That means we logged in properly. Then this .auth.store user data, we're going to pass in a data token and the data.user. We're going to pass those two pieces of information. And we're also going to say that this .router.navigate.url, this part right here, after we've done that, then and only then do we want to log in, this part. Okay, so that's kind of the way it's going to be. And then it's closing off, which will close off this part, and then we'll provide an error message to the form. Okay, so those are the changes we want to make to our form. Because we need to do the authentication on the back end, we need to pass in the data token and the data.user to the back end. Okay, it's not going to make any sense right now because of what we got going on, but these are all prep steps, believe it or not, in order for us to connect to the back end service. Okay, so let's go just formatting these things a little bit. So my auth component is pretty much done. I don't have an HTML part yet right now. We're going to add that in, and I'm just going to go back to my HTML. Right now we have auth works, which doesn't make any sense, right? So instead, what I want to do is I want to start planning out what my sports store administration is going to look like, all right? And I want to add a little bit of, on top of the nav bar, I want to add more, okay? So let's do that. So we're going to say that div with the class of bg info and a padding of 2 and text.center. This is all the stuff from Bootstrap, and inside that we're going to have an h3 tag with a sports store. It's going to be a bookstore admin because we're changing it to bookstore instead of sports store. And then what happens is whenever we do this, you have to click on here in order for Emmet to trigger. So if I click on that, it triggers. It's going to create this first div tag. Then on top of that, we're going to do our main with a class of container. And inside that, we're going to have a div with a class of row. And inside that, we're going to have a div with a class of, and don't get mad at me when I'm doing this, but basically it's just going to be aligning what we're doing here. We're going to actually add some nicer way of aligning some of this stuff. And I'm preparing that way ahead of time because I know that we're going to need to adjust for different screen sizes, which is what I've got in here. That's good for now. And then inside of there, we're going to say a div with a class of background, danger, and then we're going to have a bit of spacing. These are all the classes for Bootstrap, so nothing to worry about here. Okay, so that is inside of that. But before we close this off, we're going to make this a conditional, just like we've done before. We're going to run an ngIf. We're going to say that if my error message, if it's true, is not equal to null, we have an error message, then and only then do we want to show this part. Otherwise, don't. That's what that conditional does, error message. We want to kind of use data binding here, two-way data binding, to inject our error message if there's an error message that exists. If not, this won't be rendered again. It's only going to be rendered if we have an error message. That's why these are really, really cool, these little directives. All right, next, we're going to say h1, please log in. We're going to make that login form. So h1, and then it's please log in. Okay. And underneath that, we're going to have that form that we're going to use. So form with the class of form. Actually, there's not going to be a class yet. I think we're just going to make a form for now. Form, and then inside there, we don't want an action. Instead, what we want is autocomplete is equal to auth, right? And we also want it to be of type ng form, right? So we're going to say this is a form which is ng form. Okay, that's the first part. And on ng submit, So that's the first thing. On ng submit, we want to authenticate the form. Okay? And then that is going to be at the bottom. So the form is going to be down there. So let's take a look and see what happened here. So it says start. Okay, so this is going to say, hey, there is no directive that with export set to ng form, right? That's what it says, export as set to ng form, which is you know, a problem. That's why we're getting this issue, because it's saying, hey, I don't understand what you want to do here because there is no ng form in here as well. All right, so let's go back and check and see if I haven't missed anything, because that is an important part of our document. And I'm pretty sure that I did include ng form here. Yeah, I'm just checking through stuff now. My selector, my template URL, which is auth.component HTML style. We're just using a basic style sheet that is empty. User is user, error messages string, and router and auth. And we've got our user, and we've got this form ng form. So that should totally work. We may have to wire it up on the back end for us to not get any errors, and that's fine. I'm totally cool with that. Let's continue. But this form, this one piece that we've generated here, is kind of the first bit. Inside that, we need some elements. We need field sets. We need everything else, and then we should be good to go. All right. So that's kind of how we have to put it together. So let's do that. So again, form is ng forms. Make sure that this is correct. I'm just going through it. Autocomplete off, right? Which is good. Hashtag form means, hey, it's the name of the form is of type ng form. We're going to do an ng on submit and the form itself. And then inside the form, we're going to have some stuff. One of them is going to be a field set. And the field set is going to have a class of form-group, right? So there's form group. And inside the field set, we're going to have a label with a, and inside that, next to it, we're going to have an input with a class of form-control, and that should be all. So let's space that out now and to make sure that that works. So there's the field set, and we're going to get this going. All right, so our field set, our for, which is our label, we're going to say is called username, and it's going to say username. Very similar to what we did on the front end, or Express the last time. Form control is going to be here. This is our field set. Now, underneath form control, we're going to include some stuff that is Angular related. ng model. We're going to say that the ng model is our username. Okay, that's the ng model. Make sure this is single quotes, since we're going with single quotes the entire way. Might as well do this. And this can't be on the inside like this, because we've got extra stuff in here. What we need is just to get rid of this. There we go. So ng model is equal to username, and that is the first part. And then our name, right, is equal to username. Our placeholder is equal to enter username, enter username. Again, we could make it with a single quote or double quote. It doesn't really matter, but we should be consistent. If we're going to use single quotes everywhere, then we're going to use single quotes everywhere, and that's how it is. You don't need to use double quotes. This is just complaining because it doesn't know. We can't bind a model since it doesn't know it doesn't have a property of type input. There's no property of that. Okay. A placeholder and then an ID. We need definitely so the name and user ID, and we also need an ID which is equal to username. We need that, and then we need to make it required autofocus, which we're going to set to an autocomplete. We're going to definitely set to off because we don't want autocomplete on this stuff ever, in fact. So that's the first part. That's our first field set. Remember that what field sets do is they kind of provide an input, and there's a kind of a label and input pair, a grouping that happens with this kind of stuff in order for us to do a username and password. Let's do the password now. So we're just going to copy this just once we've got that in, and we're going to paste it. And instead of username now, it's going to be password, of course. So password, right? And this is going to be password. And the type is not text but password. It's very important, so it shows us like those dots for protection. ng model is going to be user.password. Okay, that's the user.password. Name is password. Placeholder is enter password. And where ID is password, and our autocomplete is off. It's required but no autofocus because we want it to go to the username first. That's all. Next, we're going to have a field set with a class of form-group and text right. All right, so that's what it's going to be. And inside that, we want two buttons, button 1 plus a button 2. Okay, so those two buttons, let's put those together so you can see them. Again, I'm just scaffolding it out so you can see how that looks. There's button 1 and there's button 2. Button 1 is going to have a class of, so we'll say class is equal to button dash primary, and then m-1, so it's margin of 1. We're going to say the type is equal to submit. That's the type of button. And inside there, what we want is an I tag. So an I tag with a class of FAS, FA sign in alt, which is what we used on the Express side. Okay. Followed by and again, we can put this on different lines. It doesn't really matter. So we can kind of do one of these just to make it so it's grouped together. And this would be log in, which is what is this thing, what this thing is going to make us do, log in. So it's the login button. And the next one we need, I'm just going to space them out together so we have our HTML done right, is kind of the same thing, except the button class is going to be different. The button class is going to be a button and then button dash secondary with a M1 margin of 1. We're going to use router link here, but I know that we're going to have to do some other fancy stuff where we're going to go /home. Inside the that we're going to put an I tag with a class of FAS FA-undo as an example, and with a text of cancel. Okay, so we're going to see how that looks later on. We definitely need a space in there, and one thing is we definitely need a space on here, or else these two things will be together. Next lines don't really count. So that's kind of where we are right now, and we do have some errors that are showing up. And the reason why we have these errors is because we haven't engaged the model properly, and that's okay. Remember, we talked about this. We're just preparing. This is all prep work that we're doing for this. Okay, just like we don't have a model for this, the form, and all that kind of stuff. You know, for the ng on submit, normally you can put this on one line. So, but notice how this doesn't come up. So it says no directive export as set to ng form. Okay. So save, going back to this again one more time. I wanted to show you this so that you know that the auth component.ts, we have all the piece parts we need. These are all good. User is good. These parts we don't need. This one we really don't need. We don't need a selector. We can remove that. We just need a template URL, so we just can get rid of that. And we really don't need style URLs because we're not styling anything. So you can actually remove stuff that you don't need in this in this whole thing here. So we definitely need user. I'm just going to make sure that the spacing is all right. User and username error message we got, and the router and the auth service like we said before. I'm just going to make this spacing better. So we have this, and then we get to this authenticate piece. And the authenticate piece allows us to connect to the authenticate and then we're going to subscribe to our data model. And if my data is success, then we're going to do all this work. So that is correct. We're having a bit of an error, but that's okay because it's not connected to the back end, or it's not connected at all. That's where we're getting this error, this problem, right? Because our auth component really doesn't, compute right now, if you will, right? And that's the first piece. The first piece is our auth component, and we also have an auth service. Let's complete the auth service now. Now, in order for us to complete the auth service, which is inside of our model folder, we need to connect to the data source. Remember that our data source is a REST data source. That's this. So let's update this now. Okay. So in our REST data source, let's see what we need to do to connect to it. So far we have injectable, HTTP, observable. We have our book as an example. And we have our order, but we don't have our cart object. Remember we talked about this whole cart model that we're going to use later on. Or we have no way of mapping our cart. We have HTTP headers up here and a JWT helper service here. So a couple things we're missing. We're missing a map, so let's put that in for now. So we're going to put that in before the JWT service after the order. So it's going to be import map. We're going to do that from rxjs /operators. Okay, so that's kind of one thing we're going to use. We may remove that later on. That's one. And the next thing is we have HTTP headers. We want to talk about this cart object that we're going to be using, a cart model, right? We don't have a cart model, but we need to create it. Remember, because on the back end, we actually do have a cart, and we don't have a cart on the front end. So let's go and make a cart model now. Again, these are all required things that we haven't had a chance to do because, again, there's been no need for it. Okay, so let's start doing it. So again, under model, we're going to make a new file. We're going to call this cart.model.ts. And do we not have that already? Oh, we do. Here it is. Here's our cart model. We just have to engage it. So we have add line, we have update quantity, we have remove line. Just want to make sure we have everything we need. We have clear, we have recalculate, a bunch of different ways. We also have the cart line with this. Actually, we're all good. It looks like we have already prepped in the previous video, which is awesome. All right. And that makes it so that my job right now, when I'm coding, is a lot easier. Why? Back into the auth service. Well, what I can do with the auth service now is engage that, in the REST data source. That's where we have to be, because REST data source is not complete. We need to add a reference to the cart model. So book, and underneath that, import. We need to get the cart from ./cart model. So that's what that does. That kind of injects the cart model in there. We're going to probably use that in here. All right, so now we have our base URL and auth token, but one thing we're missing is a user again, because we're running around with a new user object, which we never needed before, right? And in order for me to make this user work, we need to engage the user object. So the way to do this instead of user is be careful and just go user, which actually installs the user from the model. All right, so that's what this does. So now we have our user, our base URL, and auth token. These are all required objects. We have our HTTP options, which we prepared with last time, which is really great, as well as a private constructor. Let's make this how it should be. This should kind of be, we've been doing this the entire time. So private HTTP client with a JWT helper service. Okay, that's what this does. Inside here, we have in the constructor, so far we have the base URL, but also what I want to include is this .user is equal to a new user object. Now we could also have inherited from, which we didn't, we could have inherited from ng on init here, but instead we're just putting it inside the constructor function, which is going to make it a little bit tightly coupled, but that's okay. All right, so this is the get books. We have our save order, if I want to save an order, right, as an example. And now comes the crux of the matter. We want to be able to log in and log out and all that kind of stuff, and we haven't had a chance to program this in. Let's do it now. So get books, save order. We can get orders, that's multiple orders, but we want to be able to authenticate. Let's do that. So we're going to say, hey, I want to be able to authenticate. I want to get a user object, right, where I return an observable of type any. And I want to return this.http.post any, which I'm going to pass in the this.base URL. So again, it's just up there. The protocol HTTP, right? That's the base URL plus the host name 127.0.0.1 in this case, or when we put it online, it'll be whatever that new host name we're gonna receive is. Plus, we're gonna get the login. So that's what it's gonna be, login, followed by user information and this.http options. We want to pass this options in because this is the header that we need, that we created, that's going to provide us with everything we need. So let's authenticate, okay? I'm just leaving this here for now. Then the next one is store user data, which we don't have. Let's do that. So we're going to say store user data, and we're going to pass in the token of type any with a user of type user, and we're going to return void. And what it's going to do is we're going to actually store stuff in local storage. Store local storage, set item, and we're going to do this the same thing for our shopping cart at some other point in the future. Token, and we're going to say that the bearer, remember we talked about this bearer idea in the PowerPoint, plus the token is what we want to store in local storage. Then we're going to say local storage.set item. We also want to store user information, which we're going to get json.stringify, and we're going to pass in the user to store it inside of our local storage. It's going to be in plain text, but it's okay because for now this is just our learning. This dot auth token is equal to token, and this dot user is equal to user. So that's going to be, when we store everything, we store the token that we've just created, that we're getting passed into the data. We're storing one copy inside of local storage. The other one we're keeping here, which is floating around inside of our REST data service that we can use if we need to, which is a key. Okay, next. We're going to keep going. We're going to do the logout service now. So logout is going to be, again, it's going to be observable of type any. And logout is going to call the logout option. So this .auth token, we're going to set this to null. So we're going to remove the auth token. We're going to set that user is also equal to null. We're going to say that local storage, we're going to clear it up. And we're also going to return this.http.get any, and we're going to pass in the base URL. So this dot base URL plus logout. Okay, and then this dot HTTP options. It's important to pass the options there because it's going to create the headers we need to make sure that we have the right header set up with the JWT token. All right, the headers are super important. You can't kind of go without those. Okay, so that's log out. That's store user data. We need one to check if we're logged in, because we're going to check later on. We're going to say, hey, are we logged in? And do we have an extra curly brace? We do. Yeah, that's what happens when you type fast. Cool. So we're going to say logged in. And for logged in, we're going to check to see, it's going to return a Boolean. And this is going to do something different. It's going to say return. We're going to return this dot http.get. Actually, JWT service. Remember, if it's not logged in, dot is token expired. If it's not expired, then we're going to use that token. That's what we're going to say. And why is that giving me an error? It says any use expression expected, an assignment or function call. And we are not. It's that JWT service. Yeah, is token expired. And we're going to have to check this later on, but it should be returning a Boolean. No problem. Oh, what about return? Haha, that'll be okay. All right, so that is return. Okay, cool. So that is our logged in, logged out. As an example, later on, what we're going to do, we're going to add books, update the book, delete the book. We definitely want get orders. One thing we do want to do with get orders now, in order for us to get that, is we want to load the token. And the load token function that we made is actually good for us. We've prepared to use this stuff. And what this does is it goes, hey, token, get your token if it exists from local storage. And if the token exists, awesome. If it's not, if it doesn't exist, that means there's no token in local storage and don't log in. So this is going to be our check and to make sure that we can do this kind of stuff. So getting orders is eventually going to be protected. I'm not going to protect it later. Well, for getting orders, maybe that's enough. We can probably just do it one time. So it'll protect this dot load token. And if load token doesn't work, then it's not going to be good. Okay. All right. So that really makes up what we want to start with right now. This is kind of setting up our service, our REST data source in order for us to do that. So let's hop back to where our problems are. So again, going back to the auth service now, right? So auth service, we can't do anything without our REST data source. And remember, we kind of had it there, and we want to set up a new user, and then now we've got this authenticate thing happening, and we have a way to do that. So we're going to say return this data source authenticate, which is this. Authenticate, and pass in the user data that we need to authenticate with. So that's what the authenticate does. Store data, we're going to say that this data source store user data, and we're going to pass in a token and the user information. Wonderful. And then finally, we're going to go into here and we're going to say return this data source logged in. We're going to check to see if we're logged in and return that result. Are we logged in or not? So again, we're using the REST data source as middleware. And then we're going to say return this data source log out, which is going to actually perform the logout for us. So that is going to be everything we're going to need in our auth service, and we're never going to pretty much touch this again, as long as we didn't make any finger tapping errors, which I may have. Cool, so that is our auth service. Let's go back now to the auth component. We don't need the auth component.css because we're not linking to it anymore. Notice that our auth component is just using the auth component.html. But this one here we don't need, so we can get rid of it. So we just delete it. There we go. Auth component. Here's this part. We're still getting that error because we haven't registered the auth component yet anywhere. Where it's registered, we don't have the form data, and we're going to look at that in a sec. Okay. So where we have to do it is an admin module. So in the admin, we don't have admin yet, but in admin, we're going to make a new module in the admin folder. New folder. We're going to call this the admin module.ts. There it is. So we have auth. There's the auth. But then admin module is where we're going to actually create our feature module for the administration portion of the site. One thing to note is when we added a component, which is this auth component, it got added into app module by default. There's your auth component. Let's get rid of that for now because that will not compute. It's going to be something that's going to be inside of the admin folder, the admin module, which we're going to add in later on. So let's go back to the admin module now and see how that works. Notice that the errors went away because we've never registered it until now. All right. So admin module, what does that look like? Okay, now we've got some stuff happening that's a little different than what we've been doing up until now. Okay. So we want to authenticate, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about before I import, we're going to do a const routing. We're going to make some special routing feature in here. We're going to use the router module .forChild, and router module, we want to use this one. Oops, undo. We want to use this one, yay, which it actually does our import for us, like so, and we can use our fixable stuff. So router module, we're going to say .forChild, and what this does is it creates a little bit of routing for us. Okay, a little bit of routing. What it's going to need is some more paths. So a secondary path called Auth, right, that uses the component that is the Auth component. Hey, look at that. Auth component gets added in, right? We're going to say can activate as an example, and well, now we have a guard for our site, but we need something else. We need an auth guard, which we don't have. An auth guard is going to basically protect our sites, just like we did on the Express side when we had that. We wanted to check to see if you had authorization. We're going to do the same thing on this side here on the front end by using this auth guard idea. So if I do auth guard, I need an auth guard, and the auth guard is going to be inside of the auth component, this one inside here. So let's make a new, I'm going to call it auth.guard.ts. Again, this is all prep, believe it or not, for the stuff that we're doing. Okay, so what is the auth guard? Well, we know we're going to make it injectable. Let's see if we can do it automagically here. So injectable, we're going to make it injectable, yay. And we're going to export our class, which is going to be called auth guard. There we go. Auth guard, if I can type properly, and I cannot. And the path, this is interesting. We need two things, a path and a route. We're going to say it's going to be activated route snapshot. Let's make the right choice, this one, right, which is going to import what we need, right? And it's going to be more than one, an activated route snapshot array, as well as route, which is going to be the activated route snapshot itself. Activated route snapshot. Okay, so that's that. And that's going to be inside the class so far. In the constructor function, what we're going to need is a private router, which is going to be of type router. We need this one, router. And then we also need a private auth, which is of type auth service. Auth service, which is going to be this one. So these are our dependencies. We're using dependency injection to make sure that we have everything in place. And then we're going to have that can activate function, just like we did in the other guard. Remember? Activate. And what I'm saying when I say remember is we had another guard. It was inside of our regular route, remember? And the guard that we used was there to protect our navigation. That's what it was. So I'm just going to pause with the can activate to show you this, right? So under guards, we have this thing called store first guard. Now, theoretically, I could put my auth guard inside of this guards folder. For now, leaving it inside auth guard. But if you look at the guards folder that I've made, we have this thing called store first guard, and notice we have this can activate function. It's going to be the same, but it navigates back to book list. So every time we try and navigate away, it navigates back. Same thing with this auth guard. Auth guard, what it's going to do is we want to try and to go to a site that when you're not logged in, it's going to navigate you back to the login page, which is what we want, all right? Which is kind of what we did on the Express side. So I'm going to say route, and then it's activated route snapshot state, which is going to be a router state snapshot. That's this one. Again, it's going to add in another dependency, and it's going to return a Boolean. And then we're going to say that if this .auth.authenticated, if we're authenticated, that's what it's saying, then console log let's do a console log that says authenticated, right? However, if I'm not, that's over here, else, these are I put them in so we can see. This dot router dot navigate, we're going to navigate to our admin slash auth. And in other words, that's going to give us our auth page, which is our login page. And we're going to return false. Okay, we're also going to do a console log. We're going to say can't authenticate. Cannot, because can't is an extra apostrophe, authenticate. Okay, cannot authenticate. Wonderful. Right? And let's just use our fixer upper to fix all the linting issues and check to see if we have all of our imports. And it looks like when I'm looking at my notes that indeed we do. So that is our auth guard. It's ready to go. And we need to create this because this blocks any site that is not authenticated. It's going to block us and it's going to redirect us back to the admin login page. Let's go back to my admin module. Wonderful. So in the admin module now, we need this auth guard service. So we're saying, hey, cool, can activate. We're going to say that when we can't activate, we're going to use the auth guard. We're going to say that, hey, let's use auth guard, which is this, which is going to, kind of install or import all the things that we need. The next path, we need to do two paths. One is the auth path, and the other path is not, we don't have it yet, but we need to make an admin component, which we haven't done yet. We haven't done the admin component piece yet. That's the next thing we're going to do, the main admin component, which we don't have. So we're going to say main. For now, we're going to leave it at auth component because we don't have admin component. And there's two parts. We're going to get rid of this one. I just wanted to add the auth guard in there so it would have something to do because we don't want to have an auth guard to log in. That's what the auth is going to do for us, right? And then we're going to have several children in here, which we don't have yet. And each of the children are going to have child path in order for us to get to the admin component. Okay. One thing to note is we are creating routing here inside of our admin module. We don't have to do this. We can actually use the routing module for this, but let's leave it as is for now, as it's written in the book. So a couple things. Before we do our children, we're going to have products and we're going to have orders. One thing we want to do is have an order table component, which we don't have yet, and a bunch of other stuff to show our orders. We're going to get that up, but let's start by scaffolding out our children. So these are like child paths. So we're going to say children. All right, so that's in there. And we're going to say that the children array, here's the children array, is going to have several other paths inside of it. But the one path that I want right now is a redirect to books. All right, so a redirect, I'm going to get rid of these and put it inside here for now, where we say that it's going to, just in case we have anything else other than these two, it's going to redirect us to books. Redirect to, and then books. And it's book list, actually, is what we want. Redirect to the book list. Okay. So just to make sure that everything is hunky-dory, this cannot be in here. In fact, this, because it's part of the main, this actually is one big object. It's kind of looking like this. Like so. Okay, so children is actually a child array of the main path. That's what it is. And let's just make sure that it looks that way for us so that you can easily see that this is the case. So this is one child in a group of children. We're going to have another one in there called orders in a sec. And we're going to update our router all right, which is our routing, which is what we had right now. And I don't need this for child at. I have to close it off, and I need one more path here. Let's just grab this other path here. And just in case outside of here there is another path that is random, we're going to redirect to auth. So redirect to, so we get some other list. You're trying to get somewhere that you can't go to. It's not allowed. We're just going to redirect to auth. Okay, so that's kind of our constant. We're going to update this because what we want is for us to use this thing, this object inside of our module. So now we're going to go in here and we're going to say at ng module. And again, we got our ng module up here as soon as we've done this. And then we're going to say that inside of our ng module, we're going to have our import, which is going to be the common module. There we go. Our forms module, this one. Routing, which is that object we just made, right? And we're also going to have a providers, which is going to be the auth guard. Okay, auth guard. And declarations that are going to be the auth component, undo, auth component, there we go, there's our auth component, and we don't have an admin component, but we will. An admin component, we're going to have a book table component, a book editor component, and an order table component. We don't have any of those things, so for now we're just going to use the auth component as our starting, because we're just prepping, and this is going to modify this class called admin module. Okay, the admin module class. So this kind of takes care of all of that. And I just want to make sure that we have everything we need before we continue. So it says, we have a bit of an error. It says, exports all of the basic things. The providers option can configure the ng modules injector. Why are we having an issue with this thing? Exports all the basic things. And it says object little may only specify known properties, but import does not exist in type ng module. Did you mean to write imports? Absolutely. That's what I did mean to write, and which is a finger typing error. Yay. Which we caught. Cool. So that is everything. Let's make sure we have all of our components up here. So common module, we have our ng module. I like to put this first typically, even though it was imported the way in the order that it came in. Common module, the forms module is correct, followed by the router module, the auth component, we don't have admin component yet, the auth guard, and then we're going to have several tables, which we don't have. So this is pretty good for now, and which provides us with everything we need to get going. Now we need to import this inside of my app module, remember, because this is a feature module, the admin module, and we need to add this feature module inside of our app module. Okay, our app module. So let's go back and check that out. So in our app module then, here, what we want to do is, so we have the JWT token getter, the get item, all this stuff is good. In our declarations, we have our app component which includes footer, base component, home component, all that kind of stuff. Our imports has browser module, and we're going to have our bookstore module, as well as our app routing module, which take care of a lot of the routing that we would have in the book. We show actual routing in here. We're not going to do that in here. We're going to use the app routing module for that. And then we have our JWT for route stuff like that. That's in here. We have our providers. We want our store first guard, which we don't have in here. So store first guard. We definitely want that, which we don't have yet. We need that part because store first guard is something that we want to use. Yes, we're missing that part altogether, store first guard. And that probably should come underneath the routing module, right? Which we don't need yet because we got all this routing other places. Our app component is here. And the only thing I'm looking for is our auth component. And if I'm wrong, we don't need to do that if we include the auth component inside of the in fact, maybe we don't even need this as a provider, because if I'm not wrong, we do this inside of the routing module, and that's the only place we do it. And that's why we didn't include it in here. I'm just making sure that I have everything from my notes so that it doesn't break. Let's go to that routing module and see what it looks like. So that is the app module. We just didn't really do anything there. I just wanted to make sure that things were good because there is no reference to the auth module here. It's got to be inside of the routing module. Again, as you can see how complex this can be. And it's totally fine. It just means that we have to roll with it. So let's go into the routing module. So again, if you notice here, there's app routing module, and we have all of this. And here's our store first guard. There's our provider, our store first guard. And notice that we have our home, about, product, services, book, list, cart, checkout, contact, and then we have in our imports, we want to do so under checkout, we want to do it in MEAN, which we don't have yet, okay? And we can do it anywhere we want. We don't have to do it underneath admin. We can do it underneath contact if we want. It doesn't matter, right? Because we have two of these. We have one that goes, just in case we have nothing, it goes to home. So one or the other. Just in case we have something else that goes home, some random thing. But we also want to have a path for admin. So I'm just going to take this whole thing here, and we're just going to populate that in there. We're going to have a new path called admin. Here's our admin path. And the admin is, we're going to use something called load children. Let's put this in. So we're going to say load children. And we're going to say that we want to import from the admin module all those children. So ./admin/admin module. And that's what does it. That's what links everything together. So once we've imported everything, then what we're going to say is we want to pass in this module, admin module. That's what's going to happen. And we're going to say that we can activate on store first guard. So just in case that is a problem. Okay, there you go. Let's see if we're broken. A lot of times what happens is we do all this coding, we do all this prep, and then we're broken. And we don't want that broken stuff. This is all prep we've done in this first part. And I wanted to make sure that we're good with everything. And we should probably have a space in there. That's what our linter is telling us. I'm going to save that. And let's take a look and see if indeed we've broken our code. Now, it looks like it compiled successfully. Doesn't mean anything. And we're not doing anything yet except for either logging in or not. So let's take a look. We don't have a login, the ability for us to log in at this point. Okay, and it should be no difference in the back end. But this is our first video, and we wanted to kind of set up a couple things. We set up the user and all that kind of stuff, and we got going on our auth guard, our auth component, and our admin module. In the next video, we're going to add in our admin component, which is going to allow us to do things like modify the tables and all that kind of stuff. Let's take a look and see if we're not broken, though, online. So we're going to go here, and let's do the regular things. We should still be able to do all this navigation as normal. Here, we're good. Our cart's empty. I can still do the same cart stuff that I did before, right? We can still do the same things. And I can even check out. All this functionality is good. But one thing I can't do is if I go to auth, then it should just redirect me. Watch. If I go auth, it's going to take me back home because it doesn't know how to get there. There is no link for that kind of thing. And we don't have a path to get there. So if I wanted to do the path, I want to check this path. let's go back to our auth component or our admin module, which has these little links. So, for example, if I want to log in, it's auth main. So if I go to auth main, so here, I type that in, auth main, then it should redirect us back for now because it doesn't do anything. There is nothing to do in auth main, and it says, hey, auth component. It's going to go to auth component again, which there is no admin component. This should be admin component. I set this up as our beginning, our scaffold, in order for us to start taking in some of the other stuff. Now you can see the work that we've done. We've been going for a while, and what we've accomplished here is, again, a lot of setup. So learnings in week 10 is, and we've started, kind of using the routes that we have in play already. But what we've done on the front end is scaffold out the pieces that we need to do the login piece. Except we don't have a login page for that yet, and there was no way to get there because we don't have a route for that. Not yet, but we will. Okay, so that's really it for me right now. I'm going to, in the next video, we're going to continue with this scaffold. I don't want to make this video very long, but in the next video, we're going to continue with this and add more to it. And we've already gone about an hour, and all we've done is it's just setup. So I'll see you in the next video.